Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome inside the latest Zach with an H. This is episode 29. We are here with Jeffrey Bernstein. He's also known as the SID Godfather. Learned about 5 minutes ago. That nickname has two origin stories, one of which we don't know. It's kind of muddled, but Jeff, thank you for joining. I'm excited to talk about your long tenure in the sports information field.
Many people would say too long, but we'll leave it at that.
And so for those that don't know Jeff Bernstein, he has been with NYU since 1999, spent some time with Manhattan College. Well, now they're Manhattan University. Spent some time with Hunter College. And again, NYU since 99. He is a two-borough man, two boroughs over 45 years, one city, one love, one profession.
Pretty much, it's a lot of things unique about my situation. And one of them is I worked at 3 different schools, but they're all within the same metropolitan area. So I didn't have to necessarily make new contacts, just continue to work with the old contacts. Most people, when they change jobs, they change states, sometimes even change countries. But me, I stayed local.
And so before this long-running tenure as SID, Jeff, what was the first career you wanted to have as a young kid?
Sports has always been part of my life, whether playing or working in college athletics. I guess my true love probably would have been to be a baseball player. I think that kind of stopped when I didn't make the college team at Baruch. I do think I was shafted. We had a tryout, and I thought I did okay at the tryout, at least compared to what else I saw. But I didn't get the call to advance, and that kind of ended my pro career.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and I know you have told that tale before. The detail of you potentially getting shafted, that was not. So I appreciate getting a little extra intel to really get the truth, the juice of the story.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. Life has its many twists and turns. The old expression, one door closes, another door opens. You just never really know. You don't know until you look back at everything. But as you're progressing, you really don't know what the future holds.
And did you always want to go to college in New York City? Is that always something that you wanted to do?
Actually, not necessarily. Before I started my career at Hunter College, I actually applied for over 100 jobs, really all over the country. Had some interviews. I had an interview as up in Maine. I had an interview as far west as California, but I guess I was always the bridesmaid, just never got those jobs. And really, in a kind of quirky way, I wound up at Hunter. And this is kind of interesting, I guess. So I was living in Brooklyn, and I was looking around for jobs. And one of the jobs I applied to was Hunter College. So the athletic director's name was Charlie Brown, actually called my house in Brooklyn. I was still living at home. He called my house, and I wasn't home, but he spoke to my mother. And they wound up having a long conversation, finding out that Charlie Brown used to live a block away from where I was then living in Brooklyn. So it all seemed to kind of come into place. And I guess my mom got me the interview. And so I wound up going to Hunter College and actually getting the job there. But it was only part-time. So I didn't work all day. I would get in late afternoon, work through the evening. And then eventually it became a full-time job.
And what were you kind of doing on the side? Well, so that was part-time. Was there something else you were doing as well? Or was you kind of just, cutting?
Well, I actually had right out of college, I had a full-time job at a company that would sell advertising. It was advertising for television and radio. And I was in that job for a while. And that's when the hunter job came up. I actually was doing both. And eventually, I was let go from that full time job for reasons that I actually never quite understood. But that gave me more time to, I guess, learn and ply my trade at Hunter again, which officially eventually became full time, and then I went on from there.
Yeah, and spending about 6 years at Hunter, what was the most important takeaway would you say that you had?
I think the most important thing is accuracy. Nowadays the news is filled with, right, quote unquote, fake news. Back in the day, there was no such thing. Like, you had to tell the truth. You had to give what was true. Like, I learned that, if a kid was batting 292, you couldn't say he was a 300 hitter. You can't say things. Your whole job is based on accuracy and people believing what you say. If you make mistakes or if you make up stories and you lose credibility, then that's really going to hurt you. And so I learned the little things. I learned about making contacts. I improved my writing, my statistical knowledge. Most important, I think, developing relationships. I think that's the old school way. That's something that I've kept for over 40 years in the business. That might make me a little bit different than people today who are just much more involved in social media and other types of things that aren't, that aren't so relationship building. Those things are being done kind of behind the scenes. I always was out there in front, making phone calls, meeting with people who could help me and help the school that I worked for. And so I've always tried to feel like the people that I work with outside of my schools are not only like, people I work with, but like our friends. And so if I'm asking for something, they might not just do it because it's a good idea, but they might also do it because they want to help me. And I think that's really, really important.
And from there, you go to Manhattan, where you were for 11 more years. Second opportunity. Did your time at Hunter prepare you for that? Was it a very different beast? How would you kind of compare and then maybe
Well, I would say it definitely helped prepare me. First of all, I'd already made, contacts with some of the local media. The wrestling coach at the wrestling coach at Manhattan had been a wrestler at Hunter. Also, the track and field coach for a while at Hunter was now also at Manhattan. So the relationships I had with them probably helped me to get the job at Manhattan. That was a big step because to go from D3 to D1, there's a lot more eyes on it. There's a little bit more pressure. There's a lot more competition. When I was at Manhattan, I always felt like we were in competition with other schools such as Fordham and Iona, we were all in the same conference at that time, the MAC. Eventually, Fordham left to go to the Patriot League, but it was a lot of comparisons. So if something happened at Iona or something happened at Fordham, like, why can't we do that at Manhattan? And it was tough because I would also say that I could still be the only person still working in the field of athletic communications who started as the head guy. Like right now, when you get a job, you're an assistant or an associate. Nobody starts as the head guy. Your first job is as an assistant. But it was kind of new back then, and I got that job. So we didn't really have anybody to lean on. There was nobody at Manhattan who knew more about my job than I did. There was nobody at Hunter who knew more about my job than I did. So really, it was always a learning experience and just trying to get better at what I did. And fortunately, I was able to, either do a good job or fool people long enough to be able to keep these jobs.
Yeah, and certainly, and we're going to continue to transition because Manhattan only takes us to 1999. You have a whole other chapter we're going to talk about. But really, part of that, it's a love of the game. It's, telling people stories, and it's continuing to make sure that everyone that comes in is ready, right? That keeps you going every day.
Well, it's a very interesting profession. Everybody comes in with you have to love athletics. I came from a family of educators, so you're mixing the two, and it mostly at the D3 level, and really at a mid-major type of thing. And at Manhattan, education is certainly you know the priority. Some might question at the big D1 schools where education lands on the list of priorities with athletics. And that's a debate for another time. But when the opportunity at NYU came open, sure enough, the wrestling coach who had been a wrestler at NYU and then at Manhattan was now the wrestling coach at NYU. And so again, I had kind of an in already. Um, I was debating whether I going to a Division III school was a career leap, uh, but NYU is a very special place. It's D3 only in athletic competition. In no other way is it like comparable to, let's say, a Hunter College, a D3, which has 4,000 students as opposed to 50,000 students. Also, I thought it was important to get a title change, and NYU was agreeable to not only make me at that time sports information director, but assistant athletic director. And that was an important step for me to have a little bit more say in what goes on besides communications. And I thought it would be important I think when young people start out in this business, when they're dealing with the coaches, a lot of them feel like, the coach is their boss, and that they have to like acquiesce to the coach. And I thought as an assistant AD, I would be looked at differently by the coaches. And that may be one of the reasons. But also, you get experience. I think the coaches, once they know that you know what you're doing and how you can help them, I think there's a certain, respect there. So I thought that NYU would be the right decision at that time. A school that can compete for national championships in most sports on a yearly basis, whereas, at Manhattan, you would hope to get to an NCAA tournament, maybe win a game, but there really was not much of a possibility of, earning a national championship.
And now you say national championship. We're going to get there, but it seems that is a phrase commonly thrown around, by Astor Place nowadays. But before we get there, I still one more question, about 99. Then we're going all the way to the present. We're going to rev things up. You've been at NYU 27 years. As mentioned, you've been in the field about 17 years before. Is this a place you still expect it to be after all this time? Certainly there's been a lot of great success, a lot of fantastic names have come through, in your department as well. The student athlete side and the marketing side, and just seems all things NYU have been really fantastic.
I've been pretty happy at NYU. I've seen my area expand to where I now have technically 3 full-time people who report to me. You really learn in this business that, whereas Hunter was a one-man shop and Manhattan was a one per full-time person with a couple of graduate assistants. NYU was the first place where I actually had a full-time assistant to start with. And like I said, we've added some people. And just there are great things that you can do at NYU, but there's also great expectations. I mean, NYU is the largest private institution in the world. NYU is a brand name. People know NYU. And I always thought that was helpful, like if I was out in some social situation or trying to promote NYU, by introducing myself and telling them, I'm an assistant athletic director at NYU. I mean, it opens doors. People know what you're about, what your place is about. And I mean, listen, I might have thought of other jobs while I was at NYU, but I don't remember, realistically, you know, wholeheartedly going to try and get another job. And then over the last, decade or so, it's like, this is me. This is where I'm at. We're really expanding. We're really doing great things. We have great visibility. I've met a lot of great people. And, this is going to be it for me. When that's going to be, we think about it, but I don't see something else happening as far as a full-time profession moving forward.
Do you want to transition a little bit, talk about broadcasting a bit? So our connection, we met in the summer of 2018, came to your office, called a little bit of soccer, moved to volleyball, basketball, and so on and so forth. And so now in the last couple of years, NYU's done what a lot of schools in the New York area have done, giving students the opportunity to broadcast, get their, really cut their teeth, get the opportunity while they're in school. Jeff, how important is it at any level, do you think, for these kids to have the chance to get the reps? And how do you think NYU athletics has changed with the students kind of leading the commentary and being able to do that before they graduate?
I think it's a luxury at some places, obviously at the big time D1 schools where they are hiring professional broadcasters. And we did that for a while, or semi-professional like yourself, where we found people who were good at what they did. And we didn't really seem to have the student interest. But we've really gone out and found that there are people at NYU who want to do this. And I mean, we're an educational institution, excuse me. We're an educational institution. We've got to give these people the chance to do this. I'm always of the theory of, even let them make mistakes. Obviously, as long as they're not egregious mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Yep. Let's get better. If we put people out there who then become professionals, that helps us, whether it's in front of the camera or behind the camera. And our broadcasting is multiplied as to what we do. We broadcast every home match of pretty much every sport now. We no longer only use one camera. We use two cameras, sometimes three. So we have people who are doing lots of different jobs at every game. We're hiring up to maybe half a dozen students for every game. It's pretty tough if you don't have the personnel. But I think it's important, and it's not only with the broadcasting, it's with students who work for me. I want to see them succeed. I want them to get better. I want them to get out in the field and be productive. And I want them to look back and say, yeah, NYU was a great place for me to be. I mean, listen, some of the biggest sportscasters out there, out there right now, have come through NYU, working for MSG, working for the New York Giants. I mean, they're out there, and I think it's just bodes well for us that we're able to, help produce those kinds. And, I used to say to myself, we'll get an angry email every now and then. It says like, blah, blah, blah is mispronouncing my son's name, or, what he said was this or that. And I write back and say, listen, these are young people learning. They're not professionals. They're learning to get better. We need to have patience. And, I think that's, pretty well accepted, except I always say to the students, as long as you're getting better, as long as you're not making the same mistakes over and over again. If you're trying and you're learning and you're getting better, that's what counts.
Yeah, and I think one thing for me that I've learned starting out doing games from the time I was a student, so when I was at Endicott and it's all students, to now, that every school, however many, there's a ton of different schools across all three divisions, and they all have student workers across the board, whether they're just getting foul balls, whether they're working camera. Sometimes, you have GAs producing the broadcast. Sometimes it's undergrads that are producing and doing everything. And it's when you look back on that, and it's like I had the opportunity to get my feet wet, the opportunity to get my hands dirty, doing everything, and being able to have that experience before your 23rd birthday. I think you're right, Jeff. It's take you so far that when you do graduate and you flip the tassel to the other side, you're already ready to go.
I mean, that's listen, I see different levels of student involvement. I've had students who came in really motivated and came out of their 1, 2, 3, however many years they worked for us, ready to go. I've seen others who maybe didn't put in as much work as they should have. I feel bad when somebody comes looking for a job. I just graduated with a degree in this. And I say, well, did you work in your college's communications office? Did you work on the broadcast? No, I worked in the cafeteria. I mean, why? Like, if you want a job as a student in one of these type of areas, you will probably get it. And even if you don't get it right away, go behind the scenes, watch how they run the broadcast. Because if you show that you really want to do it, your opportunity will come. But a lot of people don't want to do that. Well, I'm not getting paid, I'm not going to do it. Or I don't want to take away from my social time. Well, listen, the opportunity is there. It's on you. I mean, if you try really hard, people sometimes are just not good at something, but then you learn that also and you try something else.
And kind of continuing with that topic, how important is it, Jeff, for you and everybody in this field to be able to bring the level of detail to teams that don't win? Because for every Meg Barber NYU women's basketball team making the national championship, winning 80 straight games, you've got teams that are winning 2 games. You got teams that are winning 0 games, and programs that don't even look competitive and get blown out of every game in some sports, some seasons.
First of all, 91 straight games.
91 straight.
For the women's basketball team. Very good point. Very good question. We always have teams that aren't so good. Okay. What I stress to the students is that we're always going to stress the positive. So when we write, we are not unbiased. We are not unbiased. And what I mean by that is, again, we're always going to give the facts of the game, but we are under no obligation to write a story about a sport in which we did not do well and point out the errors that we made or the turnovers that we had or the penalties that we made. We don't have to do that. Like, there's a box score that goes along with each game. And if people want to examine the box score, they'll see that the first baseman made an error, or that the point guard had 3 turnovers. It's part of history. That's the way it is. But in my story, if we lose a game, let's say it's a baseball game, and we lose 12-3, I'm going to highlight how we scored those 3 runs, or somebody who pitched 2 scoreless innings, or somebody who had a couple of hits. I mean, we're not here to embarrass our own student athletes. That's not about it. They work hard. They're trying their best. I'm not the New York Times. I don't have to write a story down the middle. I'm going to write it from an NYU angle. So every once in a while, I talk to a student because I try to get them to, do these things to learn their writing. I say, do we really have to say in the headline, NYU, beaten badly by whomever? Like, why would we do that? Well, that's what happened. Yeah, it is what happened. But this is our audience. I used to say that, when I was pitching stories to like magazines, like a Sports Illustrated or Time Magazine or whatever, New York Magazine, I pitched stories to them. And then, we didn't have the internet when I started. Once you have the internet and you have a website, you have your own magazine. You have your own newspaper. You're the editor. Okay? People who are coming to it, they're not coming to read about just some game. They're coming to read about NYU, or they wouldn't come to that website. So why would I trash NYU to people who are coming to follow NYU? I'm going to put it in the best way possible. It's just like a little league coach when his kid drops the ball. Instead of saying, boy, you stink, he's going to say, good try, Joey. Good try, Joey. Let's get the next one. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to be negative when you don't have to be.
And one thing I've noticed a lot, and of course, it's just my Endicott example going there, is that every time they would win a game, you go to their account the next morning and you'll have highlights, you'll have a recap. You go and they lose a game. Sometimes there's nothing. And I think it's very well said that you can't undersell the importance of the box score, not just for following the stats, but on a day where it might not go well. You lose by 30, you lose by 8 runs, there's 9 goals, you lose 25-0 in softball, which unfortunately does happen for some programs in the greater New York City area. You'll check the box score, you'll move on, and then you're on to the next. Because for all these games that the team loses, they're still practicing, 4 or 5 days a week at least during their season. They're still spending hours traveling because the schools are far away. Not every school is within 5 minutes away. You're sitting in traffic together. You're eating meals together. So win or lose, you're still bonded, and you're still going to have to spend time. And the last thing you want to do is to be part of a place where they're not valuing the contributions you are making, win or lose. And again, sometimes these streaks might even last multiple years. You try, you do what you can. For all the teams that aren't as good, there's a team that's dominating right next door that they have to go through. So I appreciate kind of showing the human side, kind of like you talked about with the broadcasting and the growth opportunities, whether you say a name wrong or something else, you'll get them next time, which is exactly what you say when you put the write-up together.
Listen, you lose credibility if all of a sudden, because you lose a game, you don't report on it. I mean, I've got a lot of pet peeves, and one of them is, no, you don't wait till the next day to post the story if you lose. I mean, that you just lose credibility. And you're right, they are trying. The New York Post has their job is to write every game, and if the Mets lose, and if they lose badly, they're going to write it. But it's not just Met fans that are reading New York Post. It's any sports fan. And they deserve to get the game presentation of what actually happened. Again, in the 25-0 scenario. I'm going to write up the story of the game. Fortunately, there always seems to be something positive you can write. But then, if it doesn't, you just give the facts of the game. They scored, wherever the opponent, they got off to a quick start. They put the game away with 8 runs in the first inning, and NYU never recovered. Um, this person or that person had NYU's 2 hits, and we'll be back on the field tomorrow against so-and-so. Box score is there. That's all you need to do. I told the truth. I didn't dwell on the negative, and we move on.
Yeah, and just the next day example is only for the social media side of things. Not the story still gets read, but it's more so if a team loses 85-72, but you had a guy score 40, you might post the 40, but you might not post the score. But more importantly, what I'd love to ask before we move on to my favorite section, which is asking questions that have nothing to do with anything we talk about in the conversations before it. Jeff, to the people who want to work as SIDs and in the sports information space, what is your advice?
Okay, so I kind of talked about it a little earlier. So first of all, let's just go over a little history. I was going to say historical history. Sports information. Everybody was a sports information director. Nobody knew what the heck that meant. I had to explain it to my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, even my wife when I got married. Sports information director. Somehow the industry decided, and I think rightfully so, we became athletic communicators. We're telling the stories of what our student athletes and programs are doing. I think it sounds more professional, and it's a good thing. The way to get involved is to get involved. Again, most college communications offices, if you go to them looking for a job, either you'll get a job or you'll learn or you'll be able to pick up things in some way. Maybe not work in the office, but maybe at a game, maybe learn to do stats, maybe work on your writing skills, maybe help out in the broadcast. You can get into this profession if you want to by putting in the work as an undergrad. If you don't do this as an undergrad and just major in communications or sports management or broadcasting and think because you have a degree, you're going to get a job right out of college, you're wrong. It's not happening. I mean, you could be the one of 100 that some school is really just desperate and, oh, you have journalism, all right, come, you'll write for us. But then you have to learn so much about the business, you will not be ready. That's the deal. You've got to do it. I tell other people, just if you're not in school or if you get to that stage, then you need to call universities in your area and just offer to volunteer at home games or whatever. Grind it out, do the hard work and get the experience. If you don't know enough to do that when you're in college, then the odds are just not very good that it's going to come out. Now, let me also say this, as someone who's been doing this for probably longer than anybody else. You have to really think, do I want to do this? It's a grind. You have, let's say, 9 months worth of sports. And at times you have multiple sports playing big games on multiple days. You're working all day. You're working all night. You're working on the weekends. You're working on holidays. You're missing family functions. It's intense. You really have to have the wherewith, the bandwidth, as we say these days, to really want to do this. You have to have a love of sport. You have to have a love of education. It could be a great profession, but it's also very demanding. It's definitely not a 9-to-5 job. So speak to people, get some advice, and do, follow your heart, because it can be very rewarding, but it is very challenging.
Certainly is. Sometimes you'll get people that are in it for 2 years. Sometimes you get people in it for 10, 20, 30, 40, if you will. And sometimes you get the burnout. Sometimes you stay on. Sometimes, again, you look NYU. You've been there 27 years. There's some schools where I've been doing games for 5 years and seen 6 SIDs. So it obviously varies. It can change, but I do appreciate your insights. As any closing SID thoughts? We are moving away from sports, believe it or not. The last 5 minutes, no sports. Go figure. But
You don't want to talk about sports?
oh, every conversation you and I have had since we first met, I think, have had a sports tie. But that is why I love this section, because the very first episode of this pod, 25 months ago, I learned that Steve Max, who does all the Simon Says at all the sporting events at halftime, who travels around the country, says his favorite Chinese takeout spot is in Utah, which is just, for a guy that's from Westchester, that is the last thing I expected to hear. And that set the tone for this section being the best part of the show. So
Okay, well, so we won't talk about the Knicks, even though it's been quite a ride and great for the city. I think people really have to think about what they love to do. I think people have to think about what they love to do. It's not always easy to look into the future and see where you're going to be. Life is a journey. You don't know what road you're going to be taking, and where you're going to wind up, married, kids, maybe grandkids someday. I think it just evolves, and you have to try to be as ready as possible. I think you just have to, lead with your heart. As people say, lead with your head. Maybe, in some, you can make a case for either way, but you want to be happy. And you want to do things that make you happy. Like I've learned, when I was younger, and I was like the new kid on the block, and I was single, I didn't have a family, those were the guys who really put in the hours. And, I always was kind of jealous when, someone didn't come to work that day because their son was in a play, or their daughter was getting married, or, they were visiting their parents in California. I said, man, these guys have all these excuses why they're not working. And so I was left in the office working. But I realize now that I'm kind of that guy. But so that's just evolution. I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. When you're younger and newer, you got to put in the work. You got to go beyond what's expected. Get a great reputation. Have people think that you know what you're talking about, that you're someone who gives good advice, that you're someone that people would do something for you because maybe you would do the same for them. Be a good person. My mom left me with some great advice.
Sure.
And I talked before about being accurate, which is the same as being honest. And she said to me, well, there's two things that are really important. Number one, always tell the truth. When you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. When you make something up, okay, and somebody calls you on it a couple of months later, you have to remember what you said. If you're just recalling the truth, unless you just have no memory, all you got to do is remember what really happened and explain it. The other thing that she always told me was, a good life has its limit, but a good name lives forever. So you don't want to stain your name, who you are, who your family is. Like, you're not going to be here forever, but you want people to think, yeah, that was a good guy. Yeah, he was a good person. Yeah, he was a helpful person. Yeah, he did good things. Yeah, he was an honorable person. Listen, we all make mistakes. Throughout my career, there's been like, little hiccups where, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't said that. Or, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. Or I wish I had thought of that. But, they were mistakes made with good intention. They weren't made and if you're a good person, then you'll probably get through it.
Yep.
If you have a bad reputation, you're a bad, you're not going to survive those kinds of hiccups. So I think that's what's going, especially in this day and age, when people go on social media and just say anything and everything to rile people up, whether it's factual or not. It's very very detrimental. I'm glad I still come from a generation where honor means something, where honesty means something, and I think it's important to think that way, even in this day and age, because it still will help you when things go wrong.
Well said. Are you ready for a complete transition now?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna give you a nickname you haven't had since the last time you put the apron on. So, what is Chef Bernstein's favorite food to cook? Chefry Bernstein.
Chef Bernstein does not do much cooking. Which brings me to another funny story. When I was young enough, but old enough to where my parents would leave me at home by myself with all the worries of how I would get through the next 24 or 48 hours, I used to call my grandma and I'd say, Grandma, I'm really, really nervous. I was joking. I'd say, Grandma, I'm really, really nervous. Mom and Dad aren't here. I'm all by myself. I'm really hungry. How do I make toast? And she'd laugh. I do know how to make toast.
You do
But
not?
I don't cook. My biggest thing is pasta, maybe cutting up some meatballs and throwing it in with some pasta and making myself. It's not like I do homemade, sauce or anything. So I'm more of a takeout guy.
Yeah. Okay.
Eating on the run. Make myself a sandwich in the morning and bring it to work with me. Cooking is definitely not my forte.
Okay. How do you feel about board games? You a board game guy?
My family is when we get together as a group. Uno is a big game.
Yeah.
Other kind of like board games. I mean, gosh, I haven't played Monopoly in a while, but I used to do that. There used to be some games I played, but no, I'm not much of a board game guy now. But if it's what the crowd wants, I'm in.
Have you been introduced to Cards Against Humanity in any of these get-togethers? Has that come up?
Cards Against Humanity?
Yeah.
No, I love playing cards, but no, I'm not familiar with Cards Against Humanity. I can only imagine. Why don't you explain that to me?
It's kind of like where you're out with a bunch of people, and you got all different kinds of people, and you completely let your guard down. And the more let down your guard is, the better your answer and more likely you are to win.
Huh. Well, that one would have to be demonstrated to me. I don't know how much I want to let my guard down. Did you say let your guard down or let your car down?
Well, you're putting the card down, but you got your guard down. Yeah, so it could be a department-wide the end of year party 2027. Jeff Bernstein debuts Cards Against Humanity. Great content piece for the NYU Violet's Instagram page.
I would say in this profession, unfortunately, it's very difficult to let your guard down. Your guard really is always up.
Of course.
Because you've got to be careful about what you say or what you see and how you react to things that happen. You get inquiries from like the media, and you have to be very, very careful with what you say and do. So
Not that crazy, but
be
within
able to
reason.
have
But
to put the guard down a little bit more.
okay. All right. So actually, one more non-sports, then one sports, and then we will sign off. So let's see here. All right. All right. Actually, we're gonna cancel the non-sports. That was a quick little foray. Gonna have one more sports, and then we'll sign off. So, who is the favorite? This is not a slight to anybody that does not get named. But you once helped do some PR for the Westchester Apples basketball team. Who is the most memorable name or memorable person you came across in your time with that franchise?
All right, so that was a ill-fated professional basketball league back, I think, in the early '80s. I think the person that I met who was, I guess, of the most renown was their general manager slash coach, Hal Whistle, who went on and he coached in the NBA. And then he became a scout. And unfortunately, Hal passed away. I think it may have been about 2 years ago. But he was a real hustler. I mean, like, again, this was a venture that had no real credibility at the time, had no big funding. They played in Westchester. Maybe a couple of hundred people would show up to a game. Probably, I guess you compare it to like the G League team that they have nowadays, that the Knicks have up in Westchester, basically in the same place, and trying to make a name. But he helped touch me. I was at Hunter at the time, and he really helped teach me about professional sports and behaving in a professional manner. And um, he was I guess he was. I don't know. I can't really say he was a mentor, but I guess he was almost as close to one as I had. As I explained, I never really worked in a college for anybody, in my department, in my field. Obviously, I worked for athletic directors, but I didn't have anybody else in sports information or communications that I reported to.
Okay.
So he was really, he knew the game. He knew the game of basketball as well as anyone, and he was a good friend. We kept in touch for many years.
Yeah, from TCNJ, which was then called Trenton State, Lafayette, Fordham, a year with the Hawks, Florida Southern, U of Charlotte, Springfield, then with the Bucks, Nets, Grizzlies, Warriors, and was also an advanced scout in between in Dallas.
Talk about a man who couldn't hold a job. Everybody knew Hal. Everybody knew Hal. He was really, really great and just such a nice man. Really nice man.
On that note, shout out and rest in peace. Hal Whistle, he passed last February of 25, was 86.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you for your time today, and looking forward to continue to track everything NYU as the new women's basketball streak starts. You continue to play at the beautiful Paulson Center. I've been able to step in a couple of times and call a couple other schools that have used the facilities, and everything with NYU. All
Thanks, Zach. It's really nice to see you, and let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. So for Jeff Bernstein, the SID Godfather, the assistant athletic director over at New York University, this is the Zach with an H pod, and we'll see you soon.